And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist John Cowen with your aviation weather forecast. We'll start off taking a look at flying weather across the state for Friday morning. We have several areas of IFR that'll be lingering across much of mainland Alaska Friday morning, as we have a system in the Gulf of Alaska that'll be weakening over the next day or so. However, our next big weather maker will be moving south of the central Aleutians, spreading IFR conditions across that area and into the northern Gulf of Alaska. As we get into Friday afternoon, those IFR conditions we're seeing starting to spread east, mainly across the higher elevations of south central Alaska, the Chugach Range and the Alaska Range, getting into some IFR weather, mainly west of Isabel Pass. And then by Saturday morning, still some lingering areas of IFR across southern Kodiak Island, getting into Bristol Bay, as well as those higher elevations of south central that we discussed. Over the eastern Brooks Range, also hanging on to some IFR conditions there. Getting into Saturday afternoon, the interior is starting to clear out. We see beautiful flying weather across most of interior Alaska. Still some lingering marginal conditions across the northern half of the state. However, we do still have some areas of IFR across the Gulf of Alaska coastline, as well as portions of the northern panhandle by Saturday afternoon. We'll look at past conditions for Friday, Anaktuvik, looking VFR. However, we do have marginal conditions across a good chunk of interior Alaska, so the entrance to the pass on the south end is going to be more in marginal territory. We'll expect the same for Adigan Pass VFR. However, near the south entrance of the pass, we do have marginal conditions in that area. Getting you down into the Alaska Range for Friday, IFR conditions expected for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as for Rainy. Windy Pass going to start off IFR in the morning, gradually transitioning to more marginal conditions later on in the afternoon. And then as we work our way farther east towards Isabel Pass, starting off the day in MVFR conditions and ultimately ending up in VFR. Mentasta Pass looking to be VFR all day Friday. Coming south to Tanita Pass, starting off the day in MVFR territory, moving over to VFR. And then for Portage, expecting IFR conditions all day on Friday. As we look towards Chilkoot and White Pass, starting off the day in marginal, and then gradually deteriorating weather expected for Friday, getting into IFR conditions by Friday afternoon. Let's take a look at the freezing levels. So we're expecting freezing levels down to the surface across most of mainland Alaska, as is typical for this time of year. Things do increase pretty quickly to about 2,000 feet over the northern Gulf Coast, as well as much of the Panhandle. As we come towards the Aleutians, you can see our low pressure center down here. Freezing levels pretty rapidly increasing towards 8,000 feet near the center of that low. Taking a look at icing, we have a large area of possible moderate icing expected across much of the Alaska Gulf Coast and much of the Aleutians as well. Up to about 8,000 feet, or above 8,000 feet, is what we're expecting over portions of the central Aleutians that are closer to that low where freezing levels are higher. As we move north towards the Gulf of Alaska coast and over the central Bering, we're expecting occasional moderate icing conditions above 4,000 feet in those areas. Over interior Alaska, mainly just some isolated moderate stuff, but we would expect about surface to about 10,000 feet for icing in that area. Taking a look at our jet stream, we have a very strong jet stream, but it's pretty well displaced south of mainland Alaska. 180 knots with that, but again, well off the coast. We do have a core of stronger winds out of the west, around 70 knots over the interior, extending down into the Panhandle out of the northwest. Coming down to about 9,000 feet, you can see we do have some stronger winds across the central Aleutians here with 60 knots or so over the islands themselves, gradually increasing up towards 95, even 100 knots over the open Pacific. 50 knots to 45 is what we're looking at across the south central Alaska. Winds mainly out of the south to southeast. And then a core of stronger winds across the north slope at 9,000 feet. Coming down to 3,000 feet, you can see that core of stronger winds across the north slope, 55 knots at 3,000 feet expected across the Beaufort coast. So some stronger winds there. We can very well, or we can easily see our low pressure center here across southwestern Alaska, a core of 80 knot winds at 3,000 feet. Again, over the open Pacific, but we do have still some 60 knot sustained winds at 3,000 feet over the central Aleutians, 55 to 45 knots across Kodiak Island. And as you might expect for our turbulence, we do have some areas of possible severe turbulence. From the surface to about 6,000 feet is what we're looking at for Kodiak Island and the Bristol Bay coast. and then surface to about 4,000 feet over the central Aleutians. Farther north, we're looking at some isolated moderate turbulence, surface to about 6,000 feet over portions of the central interior, over towards Kotzebue Sound, and then possible moderate from surface to about 4,000 feet over the western Brooks Range. And that'll do it for your aviation weather forecast. I'm meteorologist John Cowen.